What you focus on is what you see. How many fingers am I holding up? Most people would say 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But these are the ones that I'm kind of showing you. And because I went like this, you're like, oh, it's 5, but you're not looking at this. And the point of this exercise is that there's usually more to life than what we're focusing on. We just had the midterm elections go on, and I don't typically go on social media all that often. The reason is because I hate how people treat each other. When you're behind that computer or that phone, you get to say whatever you want to say. And it's crazy that the Republicans and the Democrats, they argue and they fight. And some of the tweets that even the politicians are sending out are super toxic on both sides. And then what happens is that they start dividing people. Like, we are very divided right now. I blame most of social media. Everyone's like, well, it's the politicians. It's the... Okay, well, I don't know who's really to blame for all of it. I think it's a combination of things. But what will happen is you focus on these things over here, so then that's what you vote on. And these people focus on these things over here, and so that's what they focus on. But the truth is, there's a middle ground. And that's kind of where I stand. I stand in the middle ground. I see both sides, and I'm kind of in between. But the problem is all the in-between parties, they don't go anywhere. They don't do anything. So we're a very purple country. But this all comes back to what you're focusing on is what you see. And so set politics over here for a moment in the corner where they belong, because they shouldn't dictate your life. They should not dictate who your friends are. If you have friends who disagree with your political stance, or you disagree with theirs, please do not unfriend them or defriend them or whatever you want to call it. My personal opinion is that's very shallow. You should talk to people who disagree with you. You should have respectful conversations with people who disagree with you, and maybe even have some friends who disagree with you, because if you are so focused on one thing, that's all you're going to see, and you need someone to reflect back to you like, okay, but what about this? And honestly, stop and think about, what about this? Whatever this is. Because what I do with clients and counseling, the therapy and all that stuff, as a new therapist, I always took the side of my client, and there wasn't a whole lot of challenging going on until like one of the family members might come in and be like, well, yeah, but that's not actually what's happening. Then they say it from their point of view. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, that's what's happening. So now I got to change. And it was a mess. And what I've realized is the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. And so when let's say you're going through life, and I've done this myself. We're all human. We all do this to a degree. Whatever you're focusing on is what you see. And then that's the direction in which you move. So wherever you focus, what is that? Wherever focus grows, that's what grows. Or wherever focus goes, that's what grows. Something like that. So if you focus on one thing for too long, it actually becomes toxic. You need to balance it out. And so you have to be careful of what you're focused on. If you, for instance, like I was about to say, if you believe that your life is horrible, there's a very good chance you're only focused on like the horrible things in your life. And I get caught into this thought pattern. This thought pattern has haunted me since I was a kid, and I'm not going to go into why, and I know why because I've done a lot of self-reflection on this. But being aware of that thought pattern has really helped me to say, okay, I'm focusing too much. I'm hyper focused on X, Y, and Z. I need to focus more on A, B, and C. Right? I gotta kind of swing the pendulum the other way, and the hope is find the middle ground. What you want to focus on is important. All right. If you focus on how hard life is, which I do many times, because I know that life is suffering. I know that it's a form of suffering because, and I say this to people, sometimes the way I know I'm not sleeping or I'm not dreaming, I'll put it that way. Sometimes the way I know that I'm not in a dream is that I'm tired. You know, you get up in the morning and it's just like, you got to go. You got stuff to do. You have to survive. You got to make money. You got to take care of your kids. You got to love your wife. You got to move. When you're in a dream, it's like you feel like you just exist. Like there's no real pain. There's no suffering. There's not. I mean, unless you're having like a horror dream, right? Like some sort of scary nightmare. Yeah, there's always that. But what you're, you know, but with life, right? You know that there's suffering, but it's not all suffering. There are some great things. And one of the best ways to deal with suffering is to live in the moment. Live in that moment, because the majority of the suffering that we feel is in our mind. We suffer more from our imagination than we do from real life, especially in America. We are one of the most comfortable societies in the world, and we have people screaming about how unfair and the oppression and all that. And I'm not saying that stuff doesn't exist. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I know that we are one of the most comfortable societies in the world, and we are still complaining. We're still complaining about things. So one of the best things to do to stop that suffering is to focus on the present moment. Focus on the good things that you have. Focus on the enjoyment that you have in your life, the loved ones that you have in your life. What is good in your life? I'm not going to look it up right now, but I know it's in Philippians, and it's whatever is good, whatever is noble, whatever is true, whatever is, it goes down this whole list. It says focus on these things, right? Focus on the good, because wherever you focus, that's where you go. So if you're only focused on the bad stuff, life is going to be very difficult. The problem you run into is that your brain is meant for survival and not happiness. So your brain is more likely to start focusing on the negative because it's better to think that bush over there is a bear that wants to eat me rather than just a bush that's blowing in the wind. It's better to assume the worst than it is to get eaten by the bear. You walk up to the bush and suddenly it eats you. It's like, oh, you should have thought it was a bear. And our brains have adapted to that over time. And so now we look at the negative. 80% of your thoughts are going to be negative. 80%. On you have 40 to 70,000 thoughts a day. 80 to 83% of them, something crazy like that, they're going to be negative. And so the problem with human nature is automatically we start focusing on the negative, and then focusing on the negative does cause suffering. And the suffering is within your head. Obviously, being eaten by something, sure, that's going to cause a lot of suffering for you for a short term period. And the people around you, because now you're gone. You just got eaten by a bear. But we're not being hunted by animals. We're not being hunted by other tribes. We're like I said, we're very comfortable. And so knowing that your brain is already playing against you, it's meant to make you survive, not make you happy. So the survival mechanism will be a fight or flight, which is more of the anxiety that you feel or thinking worst case scenario. Yeah, okay, you can look at that and prepare for it, but don't live there, right? So they did this study with people journaling, and the people who journaled about the past were more depressed, and the people who journaled about the future were very anxious. But the people who journaled about the moment, living in that moment, they were happiest. They were the happiest out of the three groups. Well, technically there were four groups because they had a control group or whatever, but you get the point. So what you're focused on and typically it's going to be negative, what you focus on is going to trigger and elicit certain feelings within you. If you're focused on the good, you're going to feel good. If you focus on the bad, you're going to feel bad. And this is why, I mean, God obviously knew this. This is why where like morning devotions come from, because you're starting with something positive. You're building a foundation for your day before you go out into the world, which is also very negative. All the crime and the hatred and the pain and suffering that's going on there, because even though we're comfortable, that stuff is still happening. Crime is still happening. There's still people getting killed in the streets, and still people without food and not good water. I mean, look at the Flint crisis that took place, right? People without, water. I know a good friend of mine was affected by that, and he's still being affected by that. So there is suffering that's not in your mind, okay? I'm not saying it's all in your mind, but the majority of it is going to be in your mind. So you want to make sure that you focus on two things. You focus on the good in your life. Make sure you're balancing out the bad and the suffering with the good, and you kind of find yourself more in the middle. And then the other thing is to identify the thought patterns that you're used to. For me, I fall into these thought patterns every so often where it's like very negative, very negative, very negative. And part of it is because of my brain. Part of it is because of my trauma that happened to me at a very young age that I still deal with today. And so what I did was I took these thought patterns and I put it, and I kind of gave it a name. And I stole the name from the show Dexter. So it's my dark passenger, and he sits on my shoulder and he whispers in my ear. And every now and then I got to be like, okay, no more whispering. We're done. Let's go back. What is good in my life, right? So what you focus on grows, and what you focus on, you move in that direction. So pay attention to what you're focusing on. All right. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that observation and mindfulness are the number one step in all this. Identify your thoughts. Pay attention to your thoughts. This is why meditation is so important, because you can look at your thoughts in a non-judgmental way and say, oh, wow, I'm believing that, right? That's what I'm believing, even if it's not true. Here are facts that don't back it up. Here are evidence that says that this is false, but I still believe it as though it's true. Pay attention to your thought patterns, right? Start a morning devotion. Start moving yourself in the direction in which you want to move. Start focusing in the direction in which you want to focus. And you kind of have to do it daily, if not daily, every other day, or at least once a week. Although that's not beneficial either. It is, but it's not as beneficial, because you don't just eat once a week. Right? Like, you have to eat every day. So it's good to be refocusing your thought patterns and your self-talk and your beliefs and all that stuff, refocusing it towards who you want to become and where you want to go. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section, because where else would you leave them? That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. In the description below, we have our website. You can go on that. There are other people at Redbrook who are ready and willing to take a phone call, direct a booking. That's in there as well. The email's down there if you want to send an email, or just throw it in the comment section, whatever. Please hit the like button. Get the algorithm going for me. I appreciate it. And yeah, until next time, my friends.